This podcast is not intended to be a substitute for therapy. If you are experiencing mental distress, please seek professional help.
We are all simple miracles.
Welcome to the Wellness Project Podcast. I am your host, Wilson. Each episode aims to bring mental health awareness through exploring psychoeducation, scholarly literature, professional interviews, and the personal stories of people's journey to mental wellness. So, with that said, let's get started.
So go line your pockets with anything gold. 'Cause what good is a conscience if it can't be sold? And we are all simple miracles.
If you are considering therapy or in the market for a different mental health therapist, you should contact Cornerstone Behavioral Health. At Cornerstone Behavioral Health, the goal is to be a global voice for trauma recovery. They are a 100% telehealth agency providing mental health counseling and medication management for adults in Ohio. That's right, they offer a free consultation and accept all major insurance companies or private pay. If you go to cornerstonebehavioralhealth.org and click on the Services tab, you can read the bios of the therapists and even request one of them specifically to talk more about your mental health needs. To learn more about Cornerstone Behavioral Health, just visit cornerstonebehavioralhealth.org to register for a free consultation and response within just 48 hours. Hope starts here. Oh yeah, there you go. Kind of move it over there.
I like this setup right here.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, like with these boom mics, you can adjust them a lot more.
Right.
But it's really just about, I think, just being comfortable, and I don't know. It's all just a big learning curve,
It is.
you know.
Yeah. That's the way I've been looking at it from the office too. That's much better. There's no echo there.
Yeah.
And I've learned to not talk as loud at my office because of the microphone,
Interesting.
right? Because I have to overcome an echo in my room on my phone,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'm talking through the phone, and for some reason I talk louder on the phone.
Yeah. Yeah. Like for me, it's helped me slow down my speech so much more. And I don't know about you, but I've been told that I'm someone that will talk over people a lot. So it's, like with podcasting, you just can't do that. So it's helped me stop,
Right.
try to be a better listener.
Yeah.
I also don't really make eye contact that much when I am podcasting because I'm in such deep thought, and it's cool because you're so hyper focused on your headphones, so don't pay attention to that part. But yeah, so I'll kind of jump in and start. So not that my childhood was unique in a sense of like being far out there, but I was raised by my father, who was a police officer, and then my mother worked for the state public defender's office. So it was kind of like the running joke at the dinner table was, my dad would lock them up, and then my mom would get them out.
Right.
So
Right.
he'd,
You did what?
yeah. Oh man, just heated conversations because I don't think at the time of when I was a kid, the state of Ohio hadn't like electrocuted or sentenced someone to death in a long time. If I remember, it was like in the 90s. I used to remember the guy's name. Like I felt like it was Fryer or something like that was the guy's name. And my mom's office was representing him. And man, yeah, like my parents would get into these heated debates over the whole thing. But it was an interesting childhood because my dad, as a police officer, he wasn't like a regular police officer in the sense that he worked the streets early on in his career. But one night, this was down on High Street, down in Columbus, and it was off hours, and him and like I think four or three of his buddies who were police officers also were just playing music. They really loved rock and roll, and long story short, the chief of police at the time had come into the bar, saw them all playing, and at the end of the night told them to be in his office first thing Monday morning. And my dad, he was he was scared. He was thinking he was going to lose his job. And they offered my dad and his buddies an opportunity, I think, of a lifetime to tour around the United States and promote a positive police awareness and presence. And so I mean, not that the podcast is really about that. I guess what I was getting to the point of, as a kid being raised by a dad who was a cop, but also in like a rock and roll band, was kind of unique. And he would take me out of school and just randomly put me in these other schools. And we would go through this program called Safety City, where my dad's band would teach kids about, road safety, and like how what was one of the things was like to not drink chemicals underneath the sink or whatever. Just like like all of these like safety type things. And then at the end of the school day, they would put on a like rock and roll show. So, but it was cool. Like I really looked up to my dad as a police officer.
And that was Hot Pursuit.
That was Hot Pursuit.
Hot Pursuit.
Yeah.
I remember them. We saw them when I was a police officer, and we sponsored the county police departments sponsored Hot Pursuit. And they played at, I believe, I'm almost sure it was Oak Harbor High School. God, that was a long time ago.
It was, because I mean, I believe they were together for 13, 14 years, if I want to say. I could be really fuzzy on that, but it was just, and it really did, I think, change a generation's perception of police officers.
Yeah, I think they were so far ahead of their time with, trying to connect with younger people. Now it's all over the place, and, we've got school resource officers who are working with our kids and trying to teach young people that policemen actually are their friends, so on and so forth, and they're there to take care of them. Back then, you didn't have any of that.
Right.
And so they were probably one of the first of their kind that I could remember. We had McGruff the crime dog, right? That kind of thing. But they were really, really good. And I do remember that. And the kids loved them. And it was such a great way to connect and say, look, we're just normal people.
Yeah.
We happen to be cops, but we're normal people just like you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a great message.
Yeah. We need to humanize like a lot of these first responder type positions. I'm not a big advocate for the whole stranger danger thing, because I think that sends the wrong message.
Right.
For all of the helping profession fields out there, do you really want people to think of them as strangers? It doesn't seem to make sense to me.
No, it doesn't. And it's, I don't know. Law enforcement's changed so much. I mean, I got into it in the 80s, late 80s and early 90s. And, it was a different time then. We didn't have social media to attack the police and to attack first responders. And I don't know, I think we've just, as a society, we've just lost our mind.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's just, there's no decorum. There's no respect for, now I'm starting to sound like an old curmudgeon, right? But there isn't. And it's getting so bad that it's not just the kids, it's the adults, the adults who are supposed to be setting the example for the kids aren't doing that anymore either.
Yeah, and just the idea of, like, the resources are so spread thin. It's like, as a police officer, you're also supposed to be a social worker, you're also supposed to be a paramedic, you're also supposed to be a customer service person. It's like, what? I mean, like, what are we doing here? It's gonna sound really controversial. I'm probably bringing it up too soon, but it's been really on my mind lately, and I promise if I do say anything that I would like to take back, I hope the audience will give me that grace to sort of explain myself. But I've been really looking into in the 60s when they started to deinstitutionalize mental health facilities, state-run mental health facilities. This was during the Kennedy era. And I'm really looking at this from an amateur understanding, but it's got me staying up at night thinking about it because on one sense, yes, it sounds like a good move. You know, we've got all of these people essentially locked up, you know, they don't see their families. Who knows how well they're being treated, blah, blah, blah. Like, we've seen all of the documentaries from that side of it, right? But then part of me is really starting to realize that that was a big shift in our culture when a lot of the other resources started to get drained. Do you agree with that, or does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah,
Um,
it's again, I'm not saying that like we need to bring them back, but I was just watching this documentary on the prison system. You know, we've all, I don't know if we've all, but I'm sure a lot of us watch those shows. And for the people that are severely mentally ill or incompetent to stand trial, you know, whatever that type of population is, do you think that the jail system is really where they should be?
the way back then, and I say way back then,
Yeah.
like I'm 90, but you know, that mental illness was not something you talked about.
Right.
You just didn't.
Right.
That was not a topic of discussion at dinner. It was just never normal to talk about mental illness. And I don't think anybody really recognized it back then of what mental illness really meant. And it didn't have to mean that you were crazy,
Yeah.
that you've just completely lost your mind and you're acting like a lunatic. That
Mm.
has nothing to do with it. But, you know, we didn't know about it back then. So the only thing to do was lock people up.
Yeah.
Right? And we're supposedly rehabilitating and so on and so forth, which is just, it's kind of a buzzword to me. We're not really rehabilitating anybody when we just throw them behind bars. And I'm a big supporter of you do the crime, you do the time. But there is that element of mental illness that I can't believe for 1 second is even being treated properly in any correctional institution
Right.
anywhere. They can say they are,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, I think now like they're so overrun and full to the max that they have no choice but to be truthful and say we cannot handle this is beyond a punitive environment here. This is inhumane to keep them there. So then like what I'm learning about though is that when we decided as a nation to deinstitutionalize, there was this beautiful plan to build these community centers for these people to go to. All of this funding, people are going to live in community center mental health rehabilitation centers. None of it happened. None of it, you know? And it makes me unfortunately believe that like they were very expensive at their time. I mean, if you've ever looked at these buildings, they're stunning. Not all the time, but whenever I drive towards Tiffin, I believe Tiffin has one of the last bit like institutional buildings there. Like if you're driving down 53 towards Tiffin, and it'll be on your left-hand side, kind of like around this little neighborhood area. Like you would have no idea that it's there because, like back when they created these places, they're the landscaping and the yard and they were therapeutic places for people to get fresh air in a controlled, safe environment. They but they were expensive. So it's like part of me unfortunately believes that, like, the federal government was like, hey, we gotta trim the fat on the budget here, and we have to convince people that we can't afford to do this anymore. And we can say that, we have a plan to deinstitutionalize from the states and the federal government's, type of, oversight. Let's give it back to the community. And unfortunately, that is not what happened. And they were just released out onto the streets.
I have to go back to the Ronald Reagan years, right? When they knock on the door and say, we're from the federal government and we're here to help you.
God, yeah.
Right. And I'm not trying to get into one side or the other on the politics side. We'd go off into a whole
Yeah.
other
No,
angle.
no.
But, the government's in too much business. And I don't necessarily believe that, in our current climate, and to see how our government does spend money, and they have for years, and it has nothing to do with the political party that might necessarily be in power at that time. It doesn't matter. Our government spends a lot of money. And it's interesting to me how they pick and choose what they're going to spend money on. And a lot of times I don't necessarily think the money is going out to the places that are actually going to make a difference. We can go way back to, we were talking a little earlier about my time as a police officer, and, it was back during, what was it? Nancy Reagan was the,
Just say no.
just say no. Yeah. So it was a feel good thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Really don't think it made that much of a difference.
Yeah.
But it was a government thing that we put a lot of money into, and we're actually looking past all of the things, all of the root causes for why these things are happening. Kids are a product of their environment.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they're raised in perfectly fine families. Everything is great. Two parent household, the whole 9 yards. And sometimes those kids going off in a different direction. I've got a brother who did that. So there were 3 of us. I was a very late baby. And my oldest brother, and he talks about it now, I'm not talking out of school, was a very heavy drug addict. And like heroin and all that's black tar heroin that he was shooting up and all that stuff for years. I'm 58. He is 71. And I would say that he probably, now I'm guessing, he got clean maybe 10 years ago.
Wow.
Right? He lived his whole adult life running from spot to spot to find a way to buy heroin.
Yeah.
Right? We were brought up in a normal household, right?
Yeah.
Both of my parents were there. We had our issues like everybody does.
Mm-hmm.
But I asked him one time a few years back, and he and I went to lunch, and he said, we were just talking, and I said, Larry, I just got to know, what happened? How'd you go off the rails? And he looked at me, he's like, I wish I had an answer for you.
Yeah.
He said, Mom and Dad were always really good to me.
Mm-hmm.
They never mistreated me. I was the oldest. He said, I just had a rebellious streak in me. That was it.
Mm.
And I was going to do what I wanted to do. And he said, I know how much hell I put them through. But he said, I don't have an answer. Nobody ever did anything to me. I wasn't abused. There was none of that stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man.
It's not what you wanted to hear. You wanted to get that validation of something.
I did. I wanted an answer because I've gone my whole adult life thinking, what the hell? What happened here with you?
Yeah.
And the 3 of us are 3 totally different people. It's absolutely incredible how different we are and there's plenty of times I'll say, how are we brought up by the same parents? But yeah, that was really interesting growing up with him. I remember when I was a kid, oh man, this was probably mid 70s, I think, because I was just a little kid and I was still living, obviously I was still living at home with my parents. But the 2 older brothers weren't. And I remember one time going into the closet, and my oldest brother had a letter jacket from school.
Nice.
And grabbed it and I put it on and, got lost in this thing and put my hand in the pocket and I pulled out a vial of something. Now, I wasn't so young that I didn't know what a vial was, but I had no idea what it was. And I was so scared that I put it back in his pocket and I never said a word to anybody. And I still have some regret of that, looking back and say, man, could I have done something to change his life had I
Oh, like
said
you could
something to
have
my
thrown it
parents,
away or
right?
said something or spoke up about it.
Yeah. Yeah. But he was getting into trouble. He was, he was getting arrested. He was stealing stuff from us. And he always kept getting out of the problem or he'd get thrown in jail or whatever. And there was never anything there to help him until he got to a point where he said, well, I've got to get some, they finally did force him to get some help and they put him into a facility down in Tiffin.
Mm-hmm.
And, man, what a mess that was. That was just disaster.
Yeah.
So he got clean long enough to get out. And boy, that's a whole other episode. We're going down a wrong path there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think though, like to the point though of what you were saying about back then, that you just dropped your family member off at this institution and you just turned, like you signed them over. You just turned around. I remember my grandma and I, she used to love like watching movies and stuff. And there was this movie about a little boy or a little girl with Down syndrome. And I mean, I was born in 1984, so this was way before my era. But I didn't realize or know that in the 40s and 50s and 60s that if your baby was born with Down syndrome, your doctor just took the baby from you. That was it. Like you delivered the baby, and the doctor wouldn't even tell you. They would just say, well, something happened, and sign this piece of paper. Or they would show you the baby and then take the baby to one of these institutions. That's horrible. Absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
And the idea of just turning, your shoulder on your family member, that's horrible. Like I'm not in any way condoning that or rethinking the idea of bringing back, mental health, facilities for that purpose. However, though, like similar to what you were saying about your brother, and I've gone through similar things with my own family members of just constantly trying to help them and to give them resources and to try things out. That needs to be it. It really pisses me off when people are like, been to rehab, been there, done that, wasn't helpful. Went to therapy, tried that, didn't work. Tried this medication, didn't work, done that. It's like, good God, like, why are you such a one and done with everything?
Right.
Right.
Like, well, that's that instant gratification still. I mean, and that's been around for a long, long time, right? Well, I'll go and get help. And, if I'm in there a week, I should be fine. Or if I go to a therapist and I talk to him once or twice and everything should be groovy. But that's not the case. And a lot of people just give up really, really quickly.
Yeah. Well, it's not the case with anything in life,
Yeah.
I mean, you can forget how to do things.
You can figure out how to eat olives.
Yeah, no, that's what, yeah. So we were just talking earlier before the podcast of like, and again, it sounds silly, but like, I think it's so cool that people eat olives. Like I think people look really cool when when they're eating this salty blue cheese filled, vegetable. And I'm like, ugh, it's so gross, nasty. It's so salty. But I persevered and I overcame. I tried it 1,000 different ways. And you know what? I just ate an olive before we started this podcast. It's so salty and delicious. They're so good.
Can't.
But I went my entire life with not being able to eat an olive, And so you really, you have to put the time in.
You do. You do. I will tell you that I am not willing to put the time in.
Oh, that's okay. That's awesome.
No, definitely not going to. You said something earlier, which, I was thinking about, where we lock people away. So, that I had COVID really bad in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And I was hospitalized for 31 days, which I think was really interesting that they kept me for 31. And 30 days, I wasn't good enough to go home, but 31 I was. It was crazy. Had to have something to do with insurance, I'm
I'm
sure.
sure.
But, of those 31 days, 20, 27 or 28, I was in a room by myself,
Yeah.
alone, 24 hours a day with very little contact. Only time I had contact with anybody was when they would come in, take my vitals, give me my medication. The doctors would come in a couple times, and they're in and out.
Yeah.
And that was it. And I stared at the ceiling. I didn't even watch TV. Because at that time, the insurrection was going on in Washington, and everything was just so ugly in the world that I didn't even want to turn the TV on. I had no interest in it. So I laid there in that bed, and I kept thinking, man, how do these people do this when they get sent to prison?
Yeah.
Like, I'm out in 30 days, and I'm about to go loony.
Yeah.
And I'm not sympathizing. I do believe in that do the crime, do the time thing, but that has to have an effect on their mental health.
Yeah.
So you've got people who are already suffering from mental health issues,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not all of them. Some of them are just bad people.
Right.
But you're lumping people in that need some mental help, some or some therapy or something along those lines, and they're just lumped in with just really bad actors. So there's no solution to that. But the whole point is that when you were talking about putting people in jail, and it just brought me back to that darn COVID experience. And I'm telling you, it was harrowing. It was absolutely the most lonely, depressing, sad. I can't even, all the
Yeah.
adjectives, of how badly I felt about everything. There was like no hope. And, I would sit there sometimes and just cry.
Yeah.
'Cause I'm like, and what was really kind of funny about it now is after I got out of the hospital, it was probably a year or so after I got out of the hospital. It's been 3 years now. Somebody asked me, "Did you think you were going to die?" And I just kind of looked at them like, well, no, I didn't think I was going to die,
Yeah.
but I probably should have.
Well,
Right?
you might have not thought that, but the emotional
Yes.
experience, like you were living that.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, there's nothing worse than being alive and being trapped.
Right.
You know?
Perfect example. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was what I thought of when you said that about, the
Yeah.
people being put in these rooms. And, I don't think they should be glorified, but, I can appreciate what happens, I guess. to an extent.
Sure. And just the separation between the two, like punitive institutions, we'll call them, I mean, if that was the only sole thing that we needed in society, then they would be empty.
Yeah.
Instead, it's the opposite, because we're now lumping all of the healthcare, mental health, and services into one agency. It doesn't make sense. I mean, I would like to believe in it, and I am seeing a trend in this of now where pairing with law enforcement and pairing with prison systems, they're going to be locked arms with mental health professionals. There's just no other way that I see it getting better unless we get on board with that.
Yeah, because we're going to run out of room to build prisons.
Yeah.
At some point. I mean, I don't know what the numbers are for our correctional institutions across the country, but it's got to be staggering. The numbers have to be staggering because we have to keep building and building. And at some point, where are we going to put people?
Yeah. I don't know if at some point I remember reading this, that the United States, land of the free, has the most prisons than any other.
Yeah.
I've
heard that too.
Yeah. That's like, whoa.
Yeah. And I struggle with it because I was a police officer for, 10, 12 years, something like that. And I put people in jail, and I wanted them to go to jail. That was my job. If you did bad, I'm putting you in jail. And I was happy with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I still think that that's where you should end up.
Yeah, I mean, we at some point like, and I'm a huge advocate for the individual. I'm much more individual. Like that's more in line with my value systems. But we are in a society, people. We have to protect the general public.
We do.
And thankfully, we have police officers.
Oh my gosh.
There's nothing scarier than, trying to call or trying to get help and no one's coming.
I couldn't imagine being a police officer these days. I mean, when I got into law enforcement, like I said, it was the late 80s. And, things were a lot different then. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have cell phone cameras. We didn't have social media, thank God. And there's a fine line there because a lot of police officers got away with a lot of things they shouldn't have done back then because of these things. But now, we're villainizing and taking snippets on social media of a police interaction and turning it into just a major issue when it's not really there, which is, then the folks with the pitchforks start coming out.
Yeah.
They like to pile on and the cops do, and they need to, and they're horrible, and we need to get rid of the cops, defund them, and whatever the case may be. And it's, I don't know what the solution is for that either, but it's got to be, I don't know, it's got to be, more training opportunities and maybe more vetting. We were talking a little earlier about educational requirements to get into law enforcement. And, I remember when I first got into law enforcement, you couldn't get into the highway patrol to save your life. You just couldn't. You had to have a 4-year degree. You had to have this. You had to go through psychological testing. You had to go through all these things to get into the highway patrol. Now the bar is lowered so much because nobody wants to be a police officer anymore.
Yeah.
Nobody. So we're actually lowering the standards to get people to do a job that is thankless and dangerous and
necessary.
And I think what a lot of people don't realize is it's hard. It's hard on your mental health. It's hard on your psyche. I was a police officer in a small town, small area, right? But I could take you down there right now and drive you around and show you every fatal traffic crash that I worked on.
It stays with you.
And I can remember the people who died.
Yeah.
And it's been how long ago? Right? I remember when I first became a police officer, it was early. Holy cow, it was early. We had a little boy drown out at East Harbor State Park. So that was one of my first calls. A week later, we had another little boy drown at East Harbor State Park, and I was on both of those. And I want to say they were like 8, somewhere right in there, 8, 9, 10. Horrible. It sticks with you. It absolutely sticks with you. You can't put these things out of your mind. You can't unsee what you've seen.
Yeah. And it's even harder for people to understand because you might be at a dinner party or hanging out with friends 25, 30 years later, and that memory floods right back.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I remember a few years ago, it was more than a few years ago, it was when we moved back home. We were, my wife and I had stopped for a beer at a bar, and we were sitting there, and I saw this guy across from the bar, and he was looking at me, hard. This isn't going to be good. I think I may have arrested this guy or something. I don't know. And the next thing I know, he gets up and he starts walking over towards me. I'm like, oh, boy, here we go. We're going to duke it out right here.
Shit.
And he came over and he asked me, he's like, aren't you Steve? And I'm like, yep. He said, I just want to let you know you put me in jail. And I'm like, oh, here it goes. And then he stuck out his hand. He said, I wanted to thank you. You changed my life. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah. Could have gone either way.
That's not where I saw this going.
No. But just, you probably have, you're probably on edge all the time.
You are. I still see people that, I put in jail or I had some bad interactions with, and, I still get a pit in my stomach thinking about what happened back then and, okay, what could happen now?
Yeah.
It never goes away. And it doesn't matter if you're in a one-horse town or, you're in a two-cop town or you're in a town with thousands of people. And I would venture to say that sometimes being a policeman in a smaller community is even more difficult.
Because everyone knows you. Like
Everyone knows you.
Yeah.
They know where you live.
Yep.
They know your family,
Mhm.
right? They start talking to your spouse when they're in the grocery store or,
Yeah.
where was I going with that? There was
Well, I mean, your children could get picked on
yeah.
because their daddy was put in jail
Yeah.
by your daddy and
Yeah.
and that whole thing. And
you can never get away from it when you're in a smaller town. And this is where I was going with that. You end up handling the same types of crimes that happen in other towns. It's just not as often, right? It's just, I mean, we've handled everything, from a murder to rapes to
drownings
and lots of suicides. Lots of suicides. That was kind of crazy how many we handled.
Yeah.
But I remember the suicides vividly. Every detail about those suicides, I still remember. I remember fatalities, every details about those. I remember every detail about the homicide that took place. You just can't forget about it. You put it out of your mind for a while. It doesn't cross your mind. It's not like you dwell on it all the time.
Right.
But you can't, like I said, you can't unsee those things.
Yeah.
And it does have an effect on you and your personality.
Oh, it absolutely has to. Because I mean, like, not that you hadn't, thought about crime before being a police officer, like you knew that people did bad things, but when you're living it for 8, 10 hours straight, 5, 6 days a week, crime, death, I mean, it's just gotta be like, is this what life is? Like, can I just see like some, kid jump roping or a rainbow or something positive for a minute or a countless thank you?
So I'll tell you this real quick. This just popped into my head. So there was this incident out on the highway, and this gal was killed. Her husband was driving the truck, and allegedly she jumped out of the truck. They were having a dispute. They were coming from East Harbor. They had two kids in the car, and she allegedly jumped out of the car while they were driving, and she ended up dying that night. And I just knew. I'm like, she did not do that in front of her kids.
Yeah.
She did not.
Yeah.
And the kids were little. And I remember we were up at the hospital and we were talking to these kids and trying very hard to tread gingerly, right?
Yeah.
But also trying to figure out, did something happen in the car?
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of gave us a little bit, but it just wasn't enough. It just wasn't there. And so it was ruled a suicide. And I've always felt in my heart that was not a suicide. And it's just one of those things. You just feel it. And a couple of years ago, one of the sheriff's deputies called me and he said, "Hey, do you happen to remember this case?" And I immediately said I did. And she did not kill herself. I will tell you that right now.
Whoa.
And that's how vivid. Now, this was 25 years ago.
Did they have like new evidence?
I don't know. I don't think they really would say. I think the family was pushing for the case to be reopened.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't think it ever was reopened.
Right.
So they probably did not get enough to reopen it, but I'll go to my grave for that family and say that I don't believe she jumped out of that car.
Yeah.
But I guess the whole point of this is I can still see those kids' faces.
Yeah.
I can still see those little kids wondering what in the heck just happened in the hospital, and their dad's not there, and their mom is, and they watched her out of the car. So I have to think, what happened to those kids?
Right.
I hope to God they got some help.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, you don't unsee all that stuff. You don't ever forget about it. And it absolutely does. It does affect you, unfortunately, throughout your whole life.
Yeah, and when you're interacting with people in the public, you don't know if they are a police officer not in uniform or a first responder, let's just say. And I think we'll just probably end on, be kind to people.
That's it.
Like you never know like what someone's going through or
Yeah.
what kind of contribution they're making to society, and that internal weight that they have to hold on to.
Yeah.
So
You're right. There was gosh, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was a TikTok video of this young girl who had some developmental disabilities, and her parents are. I wish I could remember her name. Her parents are teaching her life skills.
mhm.
Right. At some point, her name's Jordan. I do know that, and they make T-shirts. Right, and it's just about being kind. Be
Yeah.
kind. Just be kind. And that's what it says on the shirt. Be kind. And they go through the whole TikTok and they show her and how she interacts with people and how it's brought her out of some of the issues that she's had and so on and so forth. And it's heartwarming.
Yeah.
It's absolutely heartwarming. And you got to buy that shirt, man. I mean,
Okay.
you got to.
Yeah, it's about, getting people, I guess this kind of wraps it up, of out of the institutions and into our community. If that's what we want, then we have to be accepting of people's differences, I mean, we're going to end here shortly, but like on the road, if you see someone with a little blue handicap sticker, you can bet that they're probably going to be traveling at a different speed or pace than what you might be used to. Leave them alone. Like, get around, like, turn, like, it's, or
I don't disagree with you, but the cop side of me says, you really need that blue sticker in there?
Oh, well,
I am totally judgmental when they get out
Yeah.
of the car at the store, and I'm like, dude, you do not.
Well, I think today it's gotten a lot more, loose on getting those stickers. But like, my dad always prided himself as a police officer for being the cop that would pull you over for going under the speed limit. That was one of his favorite things to do. Was if you were on the highway and you were going 45, he would pull you over and give you a ticket for that.
Yep.
But
I'd pull people over for driving in the left-hand lane slow.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, it's like, what are you doing? Don't you understand the social rules here?
Did
on
you
that?
take driver's ed?
Well,
right? But it is. You're right. It's just about being kind to each other, and I don't think we do a good job of teaching that younger. I think the kids need that more younger, of just being kind. And I think that the school systems are doing some really good stuff these days.
Yeah,
much better than they did long time ago. I mean, we had kids with developmental disabilities and things like that they were just I say we generally, we were just cruel to them as kids. And now, it's like they're integrated into our schools with our kids. And I watch the kids interact with folks who are not the same. And it just warms my heart. It just makes me feel good to see it.
It teaches them so much. I would agree. I think schools are doing a wonderful job on improving that. Where I see the lack is in, like, at the bar or at the grocery store or walking down the street at the store. I mean, as much as I hate going to Walmart, I am just disgusted by how people treat each other at the store. I mean, good grief, people. Like, you are not that important. You need to slow your roll.
Right.
Grocery store. Open up the door for someone that's obviously, either it's hard for them to open the door, or they just being chivalry, or, just being kind for someone that's, take your cart to the damn cart fence.
Put it back.
Or put it back.
Right.
Oh man, it drives me crazy.
Just great. You see somebody, I mean, I don't know. If I see somebody at the store and they're getting ready to put their cart and they're closing it down and I'm walking in, I'm going to need a cart. So let me take yours.
Yeah, of course.
It's just simple things that go a long way for people.
Absolutely.
Please and thank you and smile and have a good day. And how are you today? How about that? And how about just trying, hey, how's your day?
And that goes the same for the people behind the counter too.
Oh, yeah.
Because like, I mean, I might be having a bad day, and if you're rude to me or nasty because I'm there paying for a product or a service, man, thanks for rubbing salt into my wound,
And it's a salty world, man. Some of these folks are super salty. And I was up at Walmart one time, and there was a person. I'm not even gonna.
Yeah,
there was a person behind the counter and salty. Just salty, and I was just getting pissed.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and I was like, okay, we're going to turn this around. I don't know how we're going to turn this around. So I just started smiling at her, and I don't smile very often, right? I'm just trying to smile at her, and I just want to crack. I just wanted to
Yeah.
crack a smile. And I don't even remember what I commented, and it must have struck a chord with her because all of a sudden she was just chatty Cathy and just going on and
There
on
you
and on.
go.
And I'm like, okay, well that worked, but thank you very much. I gotta go now.
Yeah. But it's sometimes like you need reminded like that. It's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I do need to kind of like not dump all of my problems onto this person.
Yeah.
That's what professionals are for, people.
Yeah, that's it.
So, all right, brother. Thanks.
Be cool.
Yep. At The Wellness Project, we have merchandise. That's right, all mental health awareness themed products. We have hats, shirts, artwork, and candles. There's Quietude for anxiety awareness, Uplifting for depression awareness, Focus for ADHD awareness, and Wholeness for wellness awareness. If you would like to be a guest on the podcast, feel free to reach out. Your story and journey towards mental wellness could be a source of strength to others. Thank you again for your support. You know how this digital world works, right? Please continue to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can contact The Wellness Project at thewellnessprojectllc@gmail.com or 419-967-6366. Again, that's thewellnessprojectllc@gmail.com or 419-967-6366. Thank you again for your support and for spreading mental health awareness.